for it. Go for it.
Yeah. How's it going, guys? I'm Chris Gain, president of the Federalist Society chapter here at St. John's. Thank you all for coming out. I know it's 1L legal writing week, so double brownie points for the 1Ls that are here. And really appreciate everyone coming out. In a little bit, you're going to be hearing Professor Josh Blackman make the case for free speech on campus. It's a point that frankly shouldn't have to be made, but in today's day and age, there's no one better to make that case than Professor Blackman.
True.
Definitely. But before I introduce you to Professor Blackman, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are and some of the events that we have planned for you coming up. The Federalist Society is a nonpartisan, conservative, and libertarian organization dedicated to freedom, federalism, and judicial restraint. The Federalist Society seeks to educate the legal community through its programs and publications about how limited constitutional government based on the rule of law can have a positive effect on law and public policy. We look forward to bringing you more events like this on campus this year because there's a lot more freedom and food where this came from.
Ooh, freedom and food. I like that. And the food is free.
The food is free, yes. Taking the page out of Bernie's book.
Freedom is not free, though, Professor. Freedom is not free.
So, yeah, we have some good events coming up. Next Wednesday, same place, 4 o'clock. That's the 26th, I believe. Adam White of the American Enterprise Institute is going to be coming to talk about some
He's
of
good.
He's very good. Administrative law rulings coming out of the Roberts Court. Chief Justice Roberts will not be here, but Adam White's going to be here, and that's pretty good too. And we'll have some of that table will be building in, so feel free to come by for that too. Then we're going to have another event probably in October or November. We'll keep you posted on that. If you haven't signed up for one yet, please do. It's just Federalist Society. There's two. One of them doesn't work. The one where I'm one of the administrators is the one you can get your updates at. And also like our Facebook page, the Federalist Society of St. John's University. You can go to facebook.com/St. John's FedSoc for that. You'll have all your updates on all our free event opportunities. And now that's enough about us. Here's a little bit about our speaker, Professor Josh Blackman. He's one of the most cited legal scholars in the country. Professor at South Texas College of Law, where he teaches constitutional law. Just had a common law casebook recently come out.
No, not a casebook.
A casebook and
100 Supreme Court cases everyone should know. Buy this on Amazon now. This will help you for your 1L classes. We created a video library, 11 hours long, so you can binge watch all of con law. I'm serious. Check it out.
For sure.
This book hasn't even released yet. I've got it right here. $30. The 11-hour video library with a paperback. So check Amazon. 100 Supreme Court cases everyone should know with Randy Barnett at Georgetown.
Is McCullough versus Maryland on there?
Of course it's in there. That's chapter 3.
So if McCullough versus Maryland is on there, you read that after 1L year, and you're like, what the hell did I just read?
You will understand the necessary and proper clause.
You'll know it.
Buy it. Thank you.
For sure. Professor Blackman also has some other books that have been out, including Unprecedented, The Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare, and Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And on top of all this impressive scholarly work, Professor Blackman has been published in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and National Review, among others. So, without further ado, making the case for the importance of free speech on college campuses is Professor Josh Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am from Staten Island, so it's very close to Queens. There's a huge St. John's campus in Staten Island. Staten Island? Anyone from Staten Island here? No one? Okay, well, close enough. But it's always good for me to go home and be home for a bit. About a year ago, I was invited to speak at another law school in Queens, which is CUNY, not too far from here. The topic of that day was free speech on campus. It's a topic I have talked about many times before. But the event at CUNY went a little bit differently. I was protested. I was heckled. My lecture on free speech was shouted down. I didn't expect this to happen. I had never been protested before. But this incident crystallized some important lessons about free speech, which I want to talk about today. We all know this happens, right? A controversial speaker is invited to speak at a university. Most students don't care. There are about 40 of you here. Most people are not here. Some students care what I have to say, but sometimes students don't like what I have to say. And they stage a protest to disrupt. And there are different ways to protest or disrupt. You can stand outside the event. You can quietly protest inside the event. But what happened to me at CUNY is different. They tried to disrupt me, or to use the phrase deplatform. You know this word, deplatform? To take away my platform to speak. Now, there are different ways to respond to these sorts of events. Maybe the speaker gets angry and shouts back at the students. Maybe the speaker tries to engage the students. Or maybe the speaker abandons the event altogether and says, you know what, I am not dealing with this. This is too much for me. But in those cases, people feel cheated. What happened to me at CUNY is a little bit different. And I want to show you some video from the event. This is a video on YouTube. You can watch it. It has over 30,000 views. But this video, hopefully if this works, will give you the right frame of mind for what happened to me. So here's a setup. I was invited to CUNY. And a couple days before the event, the students told me that a protest was forming. Now, I didn't believe them. I was like, who's going to protest me? I'm not that important, right? Why would anyone waste your time protesting me? I have a hard enough time getting people to attend the event with Chick-fil-A, right? It's hard to draw you in that people would want to protest me. So I didn't believe them. But then I get on campus, and they say, yes, there was a protest. And there were about 40 or 50 people in the hallway outside the room. And they were passing out poster board and magic markers, and they were making signs to protest me. Indeed, the students actually did what I can only call opposition research on me. They researched things I said, took it out of context, and made this little flyer of all these awful things I've said and done, which I didn't actually say. And they handed these flyers out all around the school. They did a lot of work, impressive scholarship, right? And then about an hour before the event, the school security officer walked up to me. I was like, okay, whatever. And he asked me a question which I'd never considered before. He asked me, what is your exit strategy? My exit plan. I'm like, what? He wanted to know, how did I plan to leave the school? I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to take an Uber. He's like, okay, good, you're not taking the subway. Oh, and then it suddenly hit me, right, that these sorts of protests may start off peaceful, but they may not always end peaceful. And this guy was actually concerned about my physical safety, which I just had never considered before. Initially, he said, I'm just going to stand in the back and I'm not going to do anything. But then he decided to escort me to the classroom. And the video you're going to see here is actually him escorting me through the classroom. Okay, I'm going to play this video. It goes by quick, so just watch it. It's loud. There's cursing here. There's lots of mean words. If you're sensitive, leave. But they say lots of mean things. So it's a free speech talk. There's some cursing.
Guys?
All right, so there was a lot going on there, but if you could see, they had lots of signs. They called me a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a transphobe, a misogynist, a fascist, a Nazi. Every single word you can think of in the book. I don't think any of those terms are accurate. What am I? I'm a law professor. I teach at a law school in Houston, Texas. You don't know me from anyone, but I write on things that are controversial. I write on immigration. I write on religious liberty. I write on the Second Amendment. And I generally take a position that's on the right side of the spectrum. I don't consider myself a racist. I don't think I'm a Nazi. I think these are unfounded accusations. But they had this image of me, and they decided to protest me on this basis. Now, I don't actually have a problem with this protest in the hallway. All right, why? They were there exercising their free speech rights. CUNY is a public school. Professors have rights of speech, as do students. And I think it's entirely reasonable for students who don't agree with me to protest in the hallway. I have zero objections to that whatsoever. right? They were exercising their speech. Now you said, Josh, wasn't that uncomfortable? Yeah, it was, right? But that's the point, right? Speech is designed to make people feel uncomfortable. Them shouting at me and screaming all these names was designed to make me maybe reconsider my views. It didn't work. But that's what they were trying to do. And I have no objection whatsoever with this sort of protest. Now, at the very end, there's this guy right there. He sort of tries to block me from getting to the room. He didn't really do it, but he sort of just like stood in the door frame. I pushed him to the side. That's a no-go. You can't block someone from entering a room. That's a physical touch, right? But I have no problem with the protest in the hallway. Now, I'll play the video a little bit more. Shame on you. Shame on you. Yep, push him aside. Okay, now look, the room's empty, right? There were like, I don't know, 4 or 5 people actually there to hear me speak. I'm like, okay, whatever, right? You know, what's the big deal? And I thought it was actually going to be, you know, uneventful after that. It's really hot in here. After that initial incident. Okay, so I walk in. I'm like, okay, whatever. They protested me. Oh no. Oh man.
Is not another treadmill.
Okay, I was not expecting that one. Oh, crap. I'm just going to talk and let this one play out. This wireless keyboard's not very good. This is why I don't like using school's computer. Skip ad. Peloton. Okay, thank you. Oh, another ad, don't I? See, I pay for YouTube Premium. I don't have this on my computer. I'll have to keep this in mind for the future. Microaggressions? What the hell? No. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what happens? I go to the front of the room, and then I'm like, okay, I'll start my event, no problem. There's a student who introduces me, and then they come into the room. Now, actually, don't have a problem with this either. If they're just staying in the back of the room holding their signs, that's perfectly reasonable. They are objecting to me in a quiet fashion that doesn't disrupt me. But then they sort of come behind me, and they're standing inches over my shoulder. Right? They're standing immediately behind me. Now, that's when a problem begins to emerge, right? Why is it problematic when they're standing over my shoulder? At that point, it does a couple things. First, there's physical safety concerns, right? If someone's standing over your shoulders, they can do something to you when you don't see them. They're behind your back, you can't see them. Right? But why is it also problematic? I was the invited speaker, right? I was the one who was invited to speak. I had the floor. Everyone's looking at me. But now they're distracting from that. They're taking away from that focus. So there's a problem when students stand immediately behind you. But I didn't flip out. I didn't panic. I didn't do anything weird because I recognized that eventually these students would sort of lose their movement a bit. Okay. So what happens next? The students who are actually running the event try to get the students to move away from the back of the room. That does not work. Okay. Okay. Now the students will introduce me. And you're the saying, shame on you, shame on you.
All 7 of you back there. Have to get up. I don't understand how it's being allowed this. I just don't know. There are students that are directly affected by legal abuse. Legal objectivity is a myth.
Legal objectivity is a myth.
So thank you guys for coming. I'm here to introduce Professor Josh Blackman from the South Texas College of Law. He's here today to discuss the topic of freedom of speech in the context of university.
Now, have you ever tried to talk over people booing and hissing at you? It's very hard. And the fact that this booing and hissing is going on is designed to make it tough for us to speak. Now, I give him credit. His name is Justin. He's from, I think he's from Long Island somewhere. No, California. He stuck through it, and he actually was willing to push through and actually keep the event going. He was pressured to shut it down, but he didn't.
Professor Blackman has written numerous articles on numerous constitutional topics, and he's given this speech many times before. And so, Professor Blackman, everyone.
He's filming us. Just so everyone's aware, he's filming us.
Okay, so I haven't said a word yet throughout this entire protest, right? And now I'm about to actually start talking.
Well, thank you very much to CUNY for having me.
He's not having you. White men and those who support white supremacy.
I'm not white. I'm not.
So this happens a little bit, it's actually a little bit a good turn, right? They basically call me a white supremacist, which again, I don't think is accurate, but that's their opinion. And there was actually a guy in the back who was African American, and he was saying, I want to hear what this guy has to say. And the students up front were actually shaming him and saying, why are you here with this white supremacist? They're saying, why aren't you up here with us? One thing I learned that was perhaps hopefully unique about CUNY was that there was a lot of peer pressure, that a lot of the students were pressuring students not to attend. The reason why this room was empty was because students were afraid of being seen with me. At the end of the event, which I'll get to a little bit later, there were about 50 people in the room. They came in later after things quieted down. So often it's not the professors on campus who are perhaps shaping speech, it's the students who are making their classmates afraid to participate in events just like this, where you're all sitting very respectfully. Okay? So what's happening is the guy in the back was basically saying, I am here to hear what he has to say. You know, even if he has all these awful views, I want to hear what he has to say, which I was actually grateful for.
Excuse me, I think it was already explained to y'all that you're not supposed to interrupt the speaker once he starts.
Okay, so here's what happens next. An administrator walks in. She's an associate dean. Now, I'll tell you, the dean was not happy I was there, right? They weren't. They made it very clear they didn't want me there, but they did their job. They ensured that my event wasn't canceled, and that's a credit to the dean there. They didn't do much more than that, but they did not cancel the event. An associate dean walks in, and she basically tells them, she gives you a warning, you cannot interrupt, okay?
Stop. Let me tell you something. The university rules are, people get to speak. You may protest. You may protest, but you may not keep anyone from speaking. If you do, I have other things to do. I will be back. Or you can resolve this yourself. Or you can have me resolve it.
Okay.
Right?
So I want to just pose a question to you now, right? You're all students here, and then you think that there's this evil speaker on campus, and you want to protest him. And then the dean is telling you to sit down and not interrupt him. Okay? And you say, you know what? I'm not sitting down. What happens next, right? What's the remedy for students who do this? And I think it's actually a very tough question. I honestly think it's a tough question. I don't think we should be punishing students for engaging in speech. But I also think that the behavior in this case was utterly inappropriate. So how do you discipline students? Maybe a warning? Maybe you have to do some sort of community service? Maybe nothing at all. In this case, nothing at all was done. And as this video will reveal, the dean left and then they kept protesting. So in other words, this was a threat to state a threat for the record, but there was no actual force behind it. You know, they weren't going to enforce this in any way. In fact, the students started talking back to the dean. I don't know if any of you would do that, maybe not, I don't know. I sure as hell wouldn't when I was in law school. But they started talking back to the dean.
You're not children, you can't talk to us.
We're not children, you can't talk to us that way. Okay? So what happens here is also instructive. I want to use this as a lesson. There was a professor in the back who I never met, never even heard of the guy. But he says, please don't take the bait. what does that mean, don't take the bait? They thought I came to CUNY to bait them, or to use the phrase, maybe to trigger them, or to troll them, right? That I came to CUNY to get a reaction out of them. That I wanted to see them have this huge, protest and film it, and that's why I came to CUNY. Quite the opposite. I've done this talk a dozen times before. I never once had any sort of demonstration. But the point, the irony, of course, is they protested. They didn't have to. They could have ignored it. They could have stayed away, but they decided to come in and interrupt. So the professor in the back is saying, don't take the bait, don't give him the protest that Josh, that I want. So just play this for a minute. And you hear that? I am threatening them. Now, how am I threatening? Not by, I can't fight. What am I going to do, right? I can't throw a punch. But that my words and my ideas being in the same place as them was threatening. And that's a concept of threatening that was novel to me. Think of an assault and battery, right? You're one else, right? Is you have a apprehension of some sort of imminent bodily harm. Now, this is that my ideas, my words, may threaten them. Mind you, I had said one sentence at this point. I said, welcome, thanks for having me. That's all I said.
So, for those of you who are actually here to hear me speak, I'll try.
Okay, so now we're about 5 minutes in. I haven't said a damn word, but I had a plan, not a well-formed plan, but I had a plan. My plan was to actually engage them. Now they handed out this little pamphlet with all these points of things about me that are evil. I'll just give you one example, right? We have a case in the Supreme Court this year involving DACA, right, the Deferred Action Policy. Now, I think the DREAM Act is a good policy, but I think President Obama did not have the power to enact it by himself. Okay, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I think the Supreme Court will agree with me this term. Maybe, I don't know. But it's a view. But they wrote on these that I hated the Dreamers and I wanted to deport the Dreamers. I think that DACA is this awful thing. So I wanted to actually try and find a common ground with them, which is not always easy. But I tried to find a common ground. So I used some humor. Let's see how it works.
When I came today, there was a sign, Federalist, oppressors not welcome. And it says at the bottom, we reject the idea that his views, my views, merit space on this campus, and reject the myth of legal objectivity. Josh Blackman is not welcome at CUNY Law. Congratulations, you made me feel not welcome, but I'm still going to say what I'd like to say. Thank you for trying.
Always humor.
I actually want to start.
Again, they say you were threatening us. That was the response. You were threatening us.
I want to start by using the one legal argument you actually made. You said violence exists in the law, and it's a myth that law is inherently neutral. Okay? You said there's a myth of legal objectivity. So let me talk about legal objectivity for a few minutes, right? Someone did some excellent opposition research. Really good as actually applaud you. We found that 7 or 8 bullets on various videos I've given over the years. But I want to make a few points. For example, you wrote that I supported the president's decision to rescind DACA. Now let me tell you something. I actually support the DREAM Act. This might surprise you. I actually think the DREAM Act is a good piece of legislation. And we're a member.
So gaslighting, you may not know that term. What's gaslighting? Gaslighting is when we try and confuse someone so they doubt their own reality, right? They thought that I was trying to play them, right? I was trying to pull a game on them, and I wasn't. I was being truthful.
Well, let me speak, please. And we're a member of Congress. I would vote for the DREAM Act. My position is that the policy itself is not consistent with the rule of law, which teaches a lesson, right? The lesson is this. You can support something as a matter of policy, but then find that the law doesn't permit it. And then the answer is to change the law.
You heard that? at that moment, I knew I had won, if you could win this sort of thing. I said, if you don't like the law, change the law. I mean, imagine that, a law professor saying that, right? Not everything's for the courts. Their response, and again, I'm in a Jesuit school. I'll say a few Hail Marys after this, I guess, right? But oh, I'm sorry. I'm at Georgetown tomorrow. I have to keep my. I'm Jewish. I say none of the above, so I will. It's okay. I say Hail James Madison's if I may. But the students scream out. I was actually at Liberty Law School last week. I did this talk there. It was actually a little bit tricky. I was in Lynchburg, Virginia. But the students scream out, "Fuck the law." I'm like, whoa, fuck the law. Okay, no, I can deal with this. Fuck the law.
Fuck the law, right? That's a very good thing. You're in law school, right? And it's bizarre thing to say fuck the law when you go to law school.
All right, so what happens next is actually instructive too, right? The student sitting next to me, with the blonde hair, she says, "You chose CUNY, didn't you? What does that mean?" Again, they thought I came there to get a reaction out of them. But again, the irony is they didn't have to give that reaction. They chose to make a scene and a protest.
Well, if you let me speak, let me speak. So fuck the law, right? That's a good mantra, fuck the law. You do. And I'm actually very impressed. Let me say this. I'm actually impressed that there's so many of you. You can be anywhere right now. And you chose to come out here and exercise your constitutional rights. You want to exercise your rights, and I do the same. And I'm here the same. So I'm going to express my views. Let me go down this list you have. You have this little checklist, right? I think DACA. Please leave.
Okay, so at this point, things took a turn for the better, right? You heard what you said. I don't want to listen to this. They were done, right? They came there to have a fight, and instead I had a conversation, and they weren't interested in having conversations. They left. They actually, you'll see they leave the room in a minute. They went to the dean's office to complain, as most students tend to do. But this was an instance where students tried to use, just vitriol and shouting and screaming, and words diffused it fairly quickly to the point where all they had was fuck the law.
I think DACA is a good policy.
I think you're fired.
No, I'm feeling pretty good.
You're lying to yourself.
Yeah, white supremacist.
Oh,
This is really about CUNY law and how to let this happen. And shame on all of you. How could you let that happen?
I don't support this.
Okay, so what happens next is actually pretty good, right? This event starts off very, very bad, and it turns out pretty well. For the next, hour or so, I abandoned my talk. All right, I had a talk I wanted to give. I'm like, screw it, not giving that talk. So I said, I'm going to take cute questions and answers, right? I will take as many questions as you have for me. And let me tell you something. These were not easy questions.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
It's not underlined by the fact that the Constitution was about to white supremacy.
Yeah.
So the whole notion of neutrality is a false notion because we focus on
Let him talk, please.
See, they weren't even letting their classmate ask a question. He wanted to ask some tough questions.
I think that's natural truism. So I think the idea of legal objectivity, ideally that's what we strive for in the law. But also at the same time, I think it's a false argument to sit up here and say that the law is always objective because it isn't. Look at all the incidents of police brutality.
Okay. Now, I'm going to pause it there. The video goes on for about an hour and 10 minutes or so. You can watch it. It's on YouTube. But what happened after this was questions, right? Now, the student body at CUNY, I think, is probably the most progressive in the nation. Their rankings on this. It's pretty left of center. And I don't think they have a single conservative member on the faculty even remotely close to conservative. You know, maybe the socialists are a little bit more conservative than the Marxists, but you know, it's I'm only slightly exaggerating. But I mean, it's left and left, right? So many of these students had just never been exposed to a conservative in the wild. Right? This is actually AOC's district, to give you a sense of where this is located. All they'd seen about conservatism is, you know, a caricature on Fox News, maybe a clip on the Colbert Report, you know, of a Fox News character, right? And my goal was to actually articulate that there are people who disagree on the law and have different perspectives, and they're not there to throw bombs and blow stuff up. So I took questions for almost an hour on everything you could imagine. Criminal justice, the death penalty, police brutality, environmental law, slavery, abortion, eugenics, oh my goodness. Any topic you can imagine, I took the question. And if I didn't know, I said, you know what, I don't know the answer, but it's a good question. I'll try to reason with them. And I just sat there and I took questions for quite some time. Now, I want to just fast forward to the end. It's really hard for me to see the mouse, it's so small. And you can see at the end, let's see. This is not a good setup, I'm sorry. I'll try this one, I can actually see it, sorry. There we go. And you can see at the end, the room actually fills up. After the protesters left, about 40 people walk in. And a bunch of them actually told me that we wanted to hear what you had to say, but we're afraid to do so because we were intimidated by the protesters. They actually were shamed. And they all sort of filed in at the end. And many of these students said that they were afraid of speaking out in class, their own perspectives. They didn't want to be shamed by the students, not the faculty, mind you, but by their classmates, by their students. That they didn't want to have to deal with that sort of scorn. And this was a positive development, right? There was one guy who held up a sign in the back. It said, Josh Blackman is an oppressor. I'm an oppressor. My students think that at grading time, but they thought I was an oppressor. Okay, fair enough. After the event, we chatted for a bit. I gave him my card. And, you know, he was actually from Houston. We talked a bit. He was convinced that I am an oppressor. No, actually, that I am an oppressor and that I'm oppressed simultaneously. That I won't try and explain it to you, but I was both. I was both oppressed and oppressing at the same time. But then, like an hour after the event, I get this email from the guy. No, he didn't have to. And he said something that stuck with me. I'm going to paraphrase the email, right? And he says, I no longer have enough evidence to conclude that you are an oppressor. I no longer have enough evidence to conclude that you're an oppressor. What that means is I changed his mind. Imagine that, right? Imagine that, this guy holding up a sign who'd never met me, know nothing about me, based on some YouTube clips that I'm an oppressor. And then he actually heard me talk for an hour, and then says I'm not an oppressor. And I'd like to wrap up with that incident, because it illustrates that even people who disagree violently on lots of issues can learn from each other. They do, it happened. Now, maybe this was one guy out of 50, and the other 50 think I'm still a Nazi. Fine, that's their perspective. I'm not a Nazi. The irony of calling the grandson of a Holocaust survivor a Nazi was not lost on me. But this is the world we live in. Yeah. But the perspective that happens is you have discourse. Now, you are all behaved. You're not protesting, you're not shouting. I want you to ask me questions in a few minutes. I'll stop shortly. But I think this sort of forum is a good model for civility. I think you have a good faculty at St. John's. I know some of you guys sitting in the back right now. You have a lot of good professors here who don't all think the same way. But they give you a wide range of viewpoints to enrich your education. And law school is a unique place. This is the last time in your lives where you will be able to think about ideas. Once you graduate and you have to pass the bar and you get a job, you're going to be on the grind. And you're going to have a job. You're going to be committed to something. And It's going to be hard to find time to read a book for pleasure, right? It's going to be tough to check the latest Supreme Court decisions unless that's what you're working on. You know, you're going to focus, you're going to specialize. If you're a tax lawyer, forget about contracts, right? If you're a bankruptcy lawyer, you'll never study about crim law, right? You focus on what you have. So take this time in law school and really cherish it. I mean that sincerely. Go to these events like Federal Society events and American Constitution Society and ACLU, whatever event you have on campus, go to it, right? Sit there, get some free sandwiches, right? But listen to what the speaker has to say. Even if you disagree with every word he says, ask him a question, right? Ask me questions, right? Try and challenge me. I've heard all the questions, I know them all. But I want you to ask me these questions. Go talk to professors during office hours, right? Use this time to speak. Now, it may happen that someone comes on campus that you really disagree with. You don't like the perspective. You think that they're an awful person. You can ignore it, which is always very effective. You can protest outside. But don't do what these people did at CUNY. And I'll show you at the very end. They give me a round of applause.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything? Justin, can you finish this? Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you.
By the way, the guy in the back, Justin, he was the one who sent me the email being the oppressor. So he was basically saying, yeah, you're not that bad. That was his concluding remark. Okay. I'm going to stop here, take some questions, maybe talk a little bit more, but I want to get some feedback because I've been talking for 40 minutes and there's no one else here. No professor. Oh, of course, yes, the esteemed professor in the back.
Josh, I was curious whether this is something like this happening that number one, which is the question of what
Yeah.
the remedy ought to be.
Yeah.
I was thinking as you were talking, for people to maybe through an administrative rule, you're required to listen to people, or you
Oh, God.
or just even select. You can select among a sort of suite of speaking opportunities for someone opinion that you know you disagree with.
That sounds a little Maoist, a little bit of re-education, right? Yeah. No, we're old friends. Yeah, I guess I have to sit through, the Latin mass, right? If I can go that far. So a few points, right? Has this happened to me again? Not like this, although I've had related incidents. So I gave a speech at Tulsa Law School last week. Tulsa Law School University, it's a private college in Oklahoma. The topic was free speech on campus. The dean sends this very strange email. Now, the event was scheduled on September 11th, which was just a coincidence of the calendar. There was no significance. I was actually a high school student on 9/11 in Staten Island, very, very close by here, so it's a date I know very well. And the dean sent this email saying that in your discussion on 9/11, out of sensitivity, you cannot talk about violence or terrorism. Now, that's a little tricky, right? When you're talking about the First Amendment, we have cases on speech involving violence, threats, right? I want to talk about cases for prosecution of terrorism and assisting terrorism. So I was just going to ignore it and show up anyway and do my talk and go out of my way to talk about these things. But the other professor, who was an ACLU card-carrying member, sends this email to the provost and the president of the university saying, no. We are going to talk what we want to talk about. You can't put limits on it. And I seconded that email. As a general matter, I don't think administration should put limits on those sorts of topics. Maybe some broad parameters of who is welcome on campus. If you're a lawyer and you're a law professor, you're talking about the law, that's probably good enough for students to invite you. But the administration should not micromanage it. The dean actually sort of apologized, said, okay, this was a fine event afterwards, so it went okay. But nothing like this. This happens more, I think, at the undergraduate level. I think for the most part, law students have a little bit more, I don't want to use the word civility, it's a bad word, but law students have a better sense of let's hear arguments. That's something law students get implicitly. Undergraduates just let's drag them, right? Let's ratio them to death, right? Let's get them. But I've not had this happen again. Now, the second question he asked is about the remedy, right? The discipline. I have to think about that. As a punishment, you have to watch my YouTube videos, right? You know, I write a book report on my YouTube channel. I don't know, right? Like you're in 5th grade. I'm very cautious about punishing students for engaging in speech. I truly am. I mean that sincerely, especially since it's a public institution. This is a private school, so you can do whatever the hell you want, right? Within limits. But at a public institution, there are greater protections under the First Amendment. I think this is going to sound very wishy-washy, but a warning is very helpful because it's actually something in writing that said if you protest once and it happens again, you're now on notice, and then there'll be more severe punishments. That way, it doesn't come as a surprise. Law students are very short-term. You're here for 3 years, right? Whatever happens in year 1, next year there's a new crop of one else that didn't know what happened, right? So you don't have that sort of continuity or the institutional memory. So I think a warning is good at the start of the year. I also think schools can hold sessions on free speech and why it's important, like by Josh, right? Invite someone to actually explain why this is important. Do you guys cover free speech in your 1L common law class? Good, not everyone does, right? Some students will never take First Amendment. They'll never take free speech. It's not a required topic. We require it. I teach it also, but that's also useful. Now, may I pose a question back? What do you think would be a good sanction? I don't have an answer. I don't know. I go back and forth. Mm-hmm.
And we read some of Steve Whittington's book.
Oh, great.
So that might be another to include speech teaching as part of required programming outside of the actual teaching of the First Amendment. That's possible. But I don't really have other
Mr. Barrett, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm a speech guy, so
Yeah.
educating about the value of speech and exposing people to different contents of speech is part of the educational environment.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone else? Any students? That might be a good thing. What do you think? You're all 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls. What do you think would be an appropriate sanction, if any, for this sort of behavior? Maybe your perspective is different than mine. I welcome suggestions. I don't have a solid answer. I really don't. I go back and forth. Yeah.
I graduated from undergrad this past May, and from my time,
What school were you at?
I went to Florida State.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Broward County too, which is a very democratic county. And I saw in colleges, because it became large, and YouTube and online, of all these instances of things like this happening when people want to come speak. And I saw this, and it really blew my mind because, you know, there's always going to be something you might not agree with, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with everyone, but to go in to try and disrupt, to, like you said, to intimidate people to not go, and then certain times where there's violence after is wrong. And I think, like you said, a warning would be good. And I think if, even with I remember at Florida State, there were organizations that they would gather and tell all their members, and they would just go out and disrupt. And that was all, as well as pushing whatever they thought was what they thought should be the law or whatever policy they wanted. They would also do that. And I think, you know, the school has to say something, and schools that have that issue have to say something and do something about that. Because, you know, it's one thing if you think, okay, on my own, like, I don't agree with this person, I'm going to protest, but have organizations with one of their goals being to go disrupt and not allow people to speak, and getting school funding as well through my school got through SGA. I was also a senator. We had to fund these organizations. So I think there's an issue with that as well.
Very good.
I think the remedy would be the school cracking down on if they have that type of problem, warning, and then maybe sanctioning them, and maybe don't get funding for a certain amount of time. And if it's just individual students, I mean, at a certain point, meetings with the dean, attending certain types of meetings or speeches to like get a perspective.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Evan Baruch, one of the adjuncts here, graduate of law school. And you made my day when you looked down and you said you're all students here. So thank you for introducing me
You're welcome.
Making me look young as I approach age 60. I have a question actually for the professor, full-time professors. On this issue of punishment, what would happen to a student in a regular class, just the standard one of the classes,
Yeah.
who, and this can never really happen, but we've got to use this as a thought experiment, who was disruptive to the class, the way when my mother was teaching first grade in public school, she had a disruptive kid. Now there she could go to the principal and say, look, this kid is wrecking things up in the class. You got to get him him or her out of the class. And the principal got involved. We're all adults here. But what would happen? Does the university or the law school have a mechanism for dealing with a disruptive student like that, such that that rule could then be applied to your situation?
Well, let me answer the question two ways. First, if any of you pulled that in a 1L class, I think you'd be suspended. What do you think? No? Really? Oh, if someone pulled that crap in my class, they'd be toast. Really?
My understanding is there's a difference between ordinary classroom instruction and outside.
I agree.
So, for ordinary classroom instruction, because that falls into the core function of the university, if someone is disrupting the classroom and making it impossible for the professor to continue, and I think the proper procedure is to simply suspend class and report the student to the administration. And I'm not sure about the extent that you referred to.
Tell me after class.
But if it's an ongoing thing that makes having class impossible, then I'm confident that that's a different kind of situation. Then a protest for an outside speaker, which where there are different sorts of issues involved, there are choice to bring a speaker to campus. It's not part of, or so much as a core part of the experience of university instruction as the class.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a different standard for a 1L class, a required class, versus an optional extracurricular. I think these are different standards. Please. Well, part of it's Trump. I think my job has gotten tougher since 2017. I haven't changed very much, but people now think I'm a Nazi more than they used to. So he makes my job a lot tougher. But I don't think he gets all the blame. I really don't. I think students at all levels are taught that speech that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you sensitive, is speech that's not worth having. And far too many students take this notion of hate speech, which has no place in American jurisprudence, as gospel. And when they're taught that, the way to get rid of speech you don't like is to shut it down. And I think professors do convey these messages, not law school, but undergraduate. That's the message they carry through. If, you know, if they're in high school and there's some speaker they don't like, then the answer is to disinvite that speaker. Right? There's a graduation speak, whatever happens to be. So I think students aren't being taught the value of civics and free speech and free expression. And if they're not being taught that, it's unsurprising that they carry that on to law school or undergraduate or graduate, wherever they happen to be. And now these were law students. They had gone through 4 years of college and now 1 or 2 years of law school, and they still didn't get that message. And I don't think they will. And I think they learned absolutely nothing from this incident. They think that I was wrong. They think that they were right. In fact, this is funny. Someone started a rumor on Facebook that I was going to be a graduation speaker at CUNY. It wasn't true, but they flipped out. Oh, they flipped out. They actually wrote a Facebook protest group to protest a fake rumor. It's just, I found out later, so I thought it was funny. But yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I think politics is getting worse. Yeah.
One thing you mentioned is that students at CUNY have been sort of intimidated by their peers that they want to show up.
Yeah.
What advice do you have to law students generally that have
I hear you.
afraid to share them because they're afraid to be ostracized by peers.
Yeah.
Different
Yeah, I mean, look, on the one hand, I think social pressure is a good thing, right? If I would prefer that students use social pressure than actually telling the administration to disinvite someone, right? So if people say, hey, this guy's a jerk, don't go, I'm okay with that. But your question, I think, is a little bit more profound. You're asking, how should a student with non-mainstream views on a campus articulate them? My answer is not going to be something you're going to like. But my answer is this. If you think you hold a view that's not popular and you keep it to yourself, you are playing into the game. If you have a view, there are others who hold the same view. And if all of you stay quiet, you maintain to think that you're the only one. But trust me, you are not. Speaking out, one act of bravery, then triggers a cascade where it says, oh yeah, I agree with that. And then it actually starts a discussion. But if everyone keeps their mouth shut, it never gets spoken. It's, the sort of you whisper in the corner, so to speak, to use Justice Alito's phrase from Obergefell a couple of years ago. So be brave, be bold. Now, I don't think any law professor would ever punish a student for his views. John, maybe undergraduate, it might happen, but if a law professor did that, I think that'd be a serious breach of norms. If your students don't like you, screw them, right? I mean that sincerely, right? If you're trying to impress people, you can never be woke enough, right? No matter what you do, you can never be woke enough for those who demand wokeness. So I don't try. Say what you think, say what you mean, right? And if you lose a friend because of what you believe, that's not a very good friend in the first place. And I mean that sincerely. If a person is willing to dump you as a friend because of your views, and all right, whatever, you're going to lose them eventually. Eventually, you'll say something that pisses them off, so don't walk on eggshells around them. This is largely why I do what I do, and I don't care what people think. I have tenure now. Funny, I got tenure the day before that event. My tenure vote, no joke, was 24 hours for that event. It was hilarious. I mean, I would have done it anyway. I don't care. I saw a hand somewhere over there. Yeah.
How do you deal with the contemporary issue of social media platforms and search engines to be also allowed to police themselves without resorting to pressing the speech on issues they see as controversial?
Yeah, I mean, the question is about social media platforms, and it's very common that someone tweets something and then people say, oh, that's hateful, and Twitter takes it down, right? Or Facebook takes it down. As a basic level, the First Amendment, I don't think applies to these private platforms. I don't think they're common carriers. Lord help us if we start regulating. That was a message for the F word. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is the equivalent of a bolt of lightning coming down from Zeus. I'll turn this thing off. But I don't think the First Amendment really applies to these sorts of social media platforms. But even if they did, even if they were common carriers, I am not comfortable with people at Facebook deciding contours of free speech. If you don't like Twitter, then don't use it. Right? If you don't like Facebook, then don't use it. Although I fear that a lot of politicians today are gearing on the left and the right to make Facebook the next, AT&T. I don't think that'd be a bad idea. I have time for one more question. We do have to get going in a bit. Maybe one more question. Yes, in the back.
Considering that the students in that video will be lawyers, will all be lawyers.
They may already be lawyers.
Right. So how should we navigate the legal profession once we get here?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I do a lot of work with high school students, right? I do a lot of volunteering. I teach high school kids about the Constitution. Why? Because today's high school students are tomorrow's college students, are tomorrow's law students, are tomorrow's lawyers, are tomorrow's judges. When these kids become a judge, they might be members of the New York Bar, you'll be arguing in front of them. And you have a free speech case, and the judge says, no, I'm sorry, counselor, you can fuck the law, move aside, right? What? Yeah, the restatement's second to fuck it, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know, right? What happens when these people become lawyers? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happens when these people go into the real world, but it scares me. We can disagree on substance. We can disagree on immigration or on abortion or healthcare. We're not going to agree. But a basic thing we have to agree on is the right to speak freely. If we can't agree with that, then I think we are in tough times as a society. I think we should all at least take that as a good note. Thank you all so much. Please come up with questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.